The room around you has grown cold, and the sharp, metallic smell of winter frost seems to press against the window pane. You are lying awake, but your mind is not in this room. Instead, it is wandering down a dark, distant corridor of a year long gone, staring at a crossroad where you chose left instead of right. There is a specific ache in your chest tonight, a phantom grief for the life you did not live, the career you abandoned, or the person you walked away from. It feels as though your actual life is just a thin, grey shadow of the vibrant destiny you were supposed to have. Perhaps you are tracking the phantom footsteps of your younger self, wondering exactly where the mistake happened and why the current version of you feels so heavy and misplaced. Let the weight of that longings settle into the dark mattress beneath you. Right now, you do not have to fix a single choice, and you do not have to force your mind to become perfectly happy with where you are. There is no need to mend the broken threads of the past tonight, or to pretend that the ache is not there. This room is a safe enclosure, a quiet shelter where your exhaustion is allowed to speak its true name. You are not broken because you carry these ghosts, and nothing will be demanded of you during these quiet hours. We are simply going to sit together at the edge of this winter night, letting the cool air clear away the smoke of old regrets, without any pressure to resolve the story before morning arrives. There is a strange, painful paradox in the way we look backward. The human mind treats the unchosen path like a beautiful, sunlit garden that remains forever green. We imagine that, if we had taken that other turn, we would be free from sorrow, free from loneliness, and completely fulfilled. But the ancient wisdom of the Buddha suggests a very different truth. Every single path, no matter how golden it appears from a distance, carries its own hidden winter. The life you did not choose would still have brought you to your knees at some point, because grief and change are woven into the very fabric of existence. By mourning that phantom timeline, you are actually exhausting your spirit. To feed a ghost that never truly existed, take a slow, deep breath and feel the cold air move down into your lungs. As you breathe out, let your shoulders drop half an inch lower into the bedding. If it feels right, notice the exact point where your heels rest against the sheets, feeling the heavy solidity of the floor beneath the bed. You do not have to carry the weight of two lives at the same time. The burden of the life you have, combined with the heavy ghost of the life you missed, is simply too much. For one evening, it is like trying to carry a bundle of dead wood from an old harvest while the current winter is already freezing your hands. Right now, your only task is to listen to the slow, steady rhythm of this moment. Let the thoughts of what could have been drift through your awareness, like dry, brittle leaves blowing across a dark courtyard. They do not require your judgment, and they do not need your analysis. If you find yourself turning the old ledger over in your mind, gently bring your attention back to the physical sensation of the air passing across your upper lip. We are going to let the landscape of the mountain vineyard teach us how to rest, allowing the sharp edges of regret to soften into the dark, silent soil of the present. Nothing needs to be forced into bloom tonight, for even the deepest roots must first learn how to sleep in the freezing dark. High in the subalpine valley, where the north-facing stone terraces seem to climb straight into the low winter clouds, a young monk named Juro walked with a heavy stride. The twilight was deepening, pooling like thick, cold milk on the slate steps of the mountain monastery. For months, an invisible friction had been burning inside Juro's mind. Before he took his vows, he had been a young man of high standing in a prosperous river town, with opportunities to inherit a thriving merchant house and marry into a family of warmth and wealth. Now, as the mountain frost began to bite through his thin cloth shoes, he could not stop looking backward. Every cold breath reminded him of the warmth he had surrendered. He found himself constantly tracking an imaginary version of his life, a phantom existence where he was wealthy, surrounded by children, and free from the bleak isolation of the high peaks. This inner division made his daily duties feel like a heavy, meaningless penance. On this particular evening, the air carried the scent of wet clay and charcoal smoke. Juro had been sent to the steepest terrace of the monastery vineyard to assist Master Sokan, an elderly monastic vintner who rarely spoke. Sokan was a man shaped by the elements, his skin dark and lined like old wood, his palms permanently stained a deep, bruised purple by decades of handling wild grape skins. When Juro reached the terrace, he found the old man standing before a row of massive, sprawling grapevines. These vines had grown wild and thick over the warm summer months, their long, twisting branches reaching out in every direction, tangling together in a chaotic web of dry leaves and woody tendrils. In Sokan's right hand was an iron pruning hook. Its wooden handle was notched with deep grooves, worn perfectly smooth by the friction of the old man's calloused grip over 40 winters. The iron blade was curved like a crescent moon, dull grey except for the thin, silver line of its freshly sharpened edge. Juro watched in silence as Sokan stepped closer to the first vine. Without hesitation, the old master hooked the iron blade over a thick, prominent branch that had produced bushels of sweet fruit just 2 seasons before. With a single, deliberate pull of his thick arm, the iron hook bit deep into the wood. A sharp, cracking sound echoed off the stone terrace. The branch fell away, landing with a dull thud on the frozen clay below. Juro felt a sudden, involuntary knot tighten in his stomach. He stepped forward, his voice tense with a grief he could not fully explain. He asked the master why he was destroying something that had taken so long to grow, pointing out that the branch was healthy and strong, and asking why he would leave the vine so naked and ruined. Sokan did not answer immediately. He slowly lowered the iron hook, letting the notched wooden handle rest against his thigh. He reached out with his bare, stained fingers and picked up the severed branch from the ground. He held it out toward Juro, inviting the younger monk to touch the raw white wood where the blade had sliced through. "Touch this wood," Sokan said softly, his voice low and raspy like stones, scraping together. "Tell me what you feel inside it." Juro placed his fingers against the moist, cold sap at the center of the cut. He replied that it felt cold, dead, and empty. Sokan shook his head slowly, looking out over the misty valley. "The branch is empty now, because its time has passed." The old man murmured, "But the vine itself is not dead. If I leave all these old branches attached out of pity or fondness for the summer harvest, the vine will try to feed every single one of them through the winter. It will exhaust its deep root energy trying to sustain a growth that can no longer serve it. When the heavy mountain snows arrive next month, the weight of the ice on these tangled branches will snap the main trunk completely. The vine will split open, rot, and die in the frozen ground." The old master raised the iron pruning hook again, its silver edge catching the dim, slat-grey light of the setting sun to the untrained eye. This hook looks like an instrument of pure destruction. Sokan continued, his eyes resting on Juro's pale face. But it is actually an act of supreme mercy. By cutting away the paths that have already yielded their fruit, we allow the vital spirit of the vine to retreat downward, deep below the frost line. It must become a naked, knotty stump. It must look completely ruined and forgotten by the world. Only by entering that absolute dormancy can its true life survive the dark months. Juro stood motionless on the narrow stone step, the metallic smell of the frost settling over him. He looked at the fallen branch in his hand, then at the stark, bleeding stump of the vine. A deep wave of emotional recognition washed over him, hitting his chest with the force of an icy wave. He realized that his own mind was exactly like the unpruned vine. He had been trying to keep every single branch of his alternative lives alive in his head. He was exhausting his current body, draining his vital spirit every night, trying to send blood and warmth to a phantom merchant life that belonged to a past choice. He was carrying the dead weight of a summer that had already ended, making himself fragile, ready to snap under the weight of the coming winter snows. The old man turned back to his work, the iron hook making a rhythmic, scraping sound against the rough bark of the next vine. Another branch fell, its dry leaves rustling as it met the dirt. Sokan did not offer any words of comfort, nor did he explain the mystery any further. He simply left the young monk standing in the grey twilight, holding a piece of dead wood while the cold mist began to wrap around them both. Juro felt the raw, unyielding truth of the lesson sinking into his bones. The path he had not chosen was just a dead branch, and by clinging to it, he was refusing the deep, saving winter of his actual life. The cold air in your bedroom remains still, yet something within the silence has shifted. When we look back at the young monk standing on that freezing stone terrace, we are looking directly into our own nocturnal habits, the internal ache you feel when you think about your own unchosen paths is not a sign that you are living a mistaken life. It is simply the natural friction of an unpruned mind. We have been taught by the world that to grow means to constantly accumulate, to expand our branches, to hold on to every single dream, and to keep every door open forever. We treat our memories like a museum of missed opportunities, keeping each alternative future polished and on display, visiting them in the dark hours when the present moment feels ordinary or difficult. But this continuous backward glancing is an incredibly exhausting way to live. A Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to become a stone, completely devoid of feeling or memory. It does not demand that you look at your past with cold, unfeeling indifference. True, emotional freedom is much softer than that. It is the gentle recognition that your suffering does not actually live in the choice you made 5 or 10 years ago. The original pain of that choice was a single event, a moment in time that arose, performed its function, and dissolved into the past. Your current exhaustion belongs entirely to the way your mind has kept feeding that ghost branch ever since, refusing to let the iron hook of reality separate you from what can no longer grow. Think of the immense amount of internal energy it takes to maintain an imaginary life. Every time you wonder what kind of person you would be if you had stayed in that old city, or if you had held on to that past relationship, you are forcing your heart to pump its vital warmth into a limb that has already been severed from the tree. You are layering a deep artificial grief on top of your actual physical tiredness. Your body is lying right here, resting against the firm support of your mattress. but your spirit is miles away, trying to irrigate a field that does not exist. This is the true nature of human entrapment, a self-imposed winter where we freeze our own roots because we are too busy mourning the leaves of yesteryear. The wisdom of the vine teaches us that life does not require continuous outward extension to be valid. There is a profound sacred purpose in narrowing our focus, in allowing our lives to become small, quiet, and concentrated during certain seasons. When the Buddha spoke about the nature of our attachments, he was pointing to this exact tendency to cling to outgrown structures. We grasp at the dead wood of our past because we mistake the branch for our identity. We believe that if we let go of our regrets, we will lose a part of ourselves, leaving us empty and unprotected against the vast uncertainty of the future. But look closely at what happens when the old branch falls away. The main trunk does not die. It actually becomes more compact, more concentrated, and infinitely more resilient. By letting the unlived timelines drop onto the dark soil, you are not losing your potential. You are simply recalling your scattered attention, gathering your drifted spirit back into the single acre of land you actually occupy. This is not a cold abandonment of your dreams. It is an act of supreme tenderness toward the person you are. Right now, it is admitting that you only have enough warmth for one life. Current life, with all its quiet flaws and heavy frosts, is the only one that can actually hold your weight. As you listen to these words, let the realization sink down into the lower parts of your body. Notice if there is a subtle, tight holding in your stomach or across the bridge of your nose, places where your intellect is still trying to balance the ledger of your life. You can drop the pen now. The calculation is over. You do not need to prove that your current path was the absolute best choice among 1,000 variables. It is simply the path under your feet. By allowing the phantom futures to lose their color, you are giving your mind permission to stop its frantic, high-frequency searching, shifting the weight of your consciousness away from the analytical forehead and down into the resting valley of the lungs. There is a beautiful, silent relief in becoming a naked stump in the winter ground. A stump does not have to worry about looking productive. It does not have to justify its existence to the sky by holding up heavy canopies of green leaves. It is completely absolved from the duty of blossoming. It simply sits in the frost, dark and dense, trusting the cold earth to keep its deepest secrets safe until the world changes its temperature. Let yourself enter that same state of unbothered dormancy tonight, knowing that the most profound healing begins when we finally stop fighting the scissors of time. Let your breath settle into its own quiet, unhurried cadence without trying to shape it or make it deeper than it wants to be. Perhaps you can feel the slow, cool texture of the air as it enters your nostrils, contrasted with the faint, moist warmth of each release. There is absolutely no need to rush this process. Even noticing that your breath is shallow is entirely enough for this moment. With each gentle exhalation, you might allow your collarbones to widen slightly, letting the heavy, dense weight of your physical body sink a fraction of an inch deeper into the support of your bed. The mattress is completely steady, holding you without requiring any effort from your spine or your mind. If it feels right, look into the landscape of your thoughts right now, much like the old monk looking across the tangled rows of the winter terrace. You might notice a specific memory or an old regret beginning to drift across your awareness. Perhaps it is a face, a city street, or a year that carries a lingering ache of incompletion. When that thought arises, instead of pushing it away or getting lost in its history, see if you can simply name the emotional pattern. You can whisper it silently to yourself, labeling it as looking backward or feeding the ghost path. Just naming the movement of the mind strips away its power, transforming a heavy tragedy into a familiar habit of the human heart. Now, imagine that each of these alternative futures, every single unchosen path you have been keeping alive, can be wrapped in a heavy piece of coarse, damp burlap. You can visualize yourself placing these heavy bundles onto the cold, grey stone steps of the terrace, right at the base of the vine. There is no anger in this action, and there is no sense of violent rejection. You are simply gathering up the dry, brittle wood that you have carried for far too long and laying it down on the damp clay. Feel the immediate lightness that enters your chest as you transfer that emotional weight from your heart onto the stable, unyielding floor of the earth. In your mind's eye, you can see the curved iron edge of the pruning hook resting nearby, its notched wooden handle smooth and cold. You do not even have to lift it yourself. You can simply allow the natural winter of this moment, the absolute reality of what is, to act as the silver edge that severs the connection. With every slow breath out, watch the image begin to change. The heavy burlap bundles containing your phantom lives are slowly covered by a layer of dark, damp loam and fallen slate needles. The earth is naturally absorbing them, taking the energy of those unleaved dreams and turning them into quiet, rich nourishment for the soil deep below the surface. Let the entire scene dissolve into total darkness, returning your full attention to the immediate physical presence of your room. And feel the distinct coolness of the blanket against your chin, the gentle rise and fall of your abdomen, and the profound silence that pools around your ears. If your mind tries to wander back to the old ledger, you can return to this simple physical anchoring whenever you are ready. There is no requirement for immediate, dramatic healing tonight, and you do not have to force yourself to feel a sense of perfect closure. Even a slight softening of the muscles around your eyes. You are choosing to exist precisely where your blood is flowing, resting like a quiet root that has finally stopped searching for a sky that belongs to someone else. As the winter deepened, the frost on the high terraces turned into a thick, unyielding sheets of grey ice. Juro found himself sent even further up the mountain path, carrying a small bundle of grain to a remote, windswept ridge. Where the older monastics lived in total isolation, his mind had grown quieter since his evening. In the vineyard, yet a subtle, stubborn knot of resistance remained. The phantom life of the wealthy merchant still visited him during the frozen mid-watches of the night. He no longer chased the ghost with the same frantic energy, but he still treated it as a beautiful, tragic loss, a treasure that had been unfairly stolen from him by his own choice to seek ordination. Near the very summit of the crag, tucked into a shallow cave that faced the biting northern wind, lived an old weaver monk who had not left the high rocks in over 30 years. The locals called him the Weaver of the Grey Cloud, though he had no official title within the order. When Juro reached the low, stone-walled hut, the air was so cold that his own breath crystallized into white dust before his eyes. Inside, the only sound was a heavy, rhythmic thudding that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The old weaver sat before an ancient wooden loom that was rough, uncarved, and greying from age. Unlike the weavers in the lowlands, who worked with lustrous silks and brightly dyed threads. This old man worked exclusively with coarse, undyed wool. The wool was greasy, smelling strongly of sheep oil and wet grass, and its texture was so rough that it looked like twisted moss. It was the material that the valley merchants threw away, the cheap, coarse remnants that were considered too prickly and unrefined for human skin. Juro watched the old man slide a heavy wooden shuttle through the warp, his movement slow, deliberate, and entirely unhurried by the freezing gale outside. Juro bowed and placed the grain on a low bench, but his eyes remained fixed on a pile of finished blankets, stacked in the corner. They were thick, incredibly heavy, and a dull, slaty-grey color that matched the winter sky. He reached out and touched the top blanket. It felt harsh against his skin, scratchy and stiff, lacking any of the smooth elegance he remembered from the fine linens of his youth. Juro sighed softly, his old sorrow leaking out through his lips. He remarked to the weaver that it must be difficult to spend one's entire life working with such an unlovely, imperfect material, wondering aloud if the old man ever wished for the smooth silk of the valley to pass through his fingers instead. The weaver did not stop his hands. The heavy shuttle flew across the loom with a deep wooden thud. He asked Juro if he had ever spent a night on the highest peak during the black frost of January, when the wind comes down from the glaciers like a wall of iron. Juro shook his head. The weaver stopped his hand then, letting it rest on the coarse wool. The fine silk of the valley is beautiful to look at, the old man said, his voice entirely devoid of judgment. But silk is thin. It has no hollow core to trap the warmth of a man's breath. If you wear silk on this mountain when the black frost arrives, your blood will freeze inside your veins before midnight. This rough, rejected wool is the only thing thick enough to save a life up here. It holds its warmth even when it is soaked by the mountain mist. Juro looked down at his own calloused hands, the prickly texture of the grey blanket still tingling against his fingertips. The weaver reached into a wooden bowl beside the loom and pulled out a tangled, knotty clump of raw wool that had been rejected because it was full of dry briars and bits of mountain straw. He did not try to pick out every imperfection, nor did he curse the dirt embedded in the fibers. Instead, he simply smoothed the rough mass with his palm and began to feed it into the spinning wheel, turning the wheel with a slow, disciplined movement of his foot. "I do not wish for silk," the weaver murmured, looking directly into Juro's eyes, "because silk does not belong to this mountain. To spend your days wishing for a different thread is to break the loom you are currently weaving on. This rough wool is what the mountain provides, and because it is rough, it is strong. Your suffering does not come from the coarseness of your life, young brother. It comes from the fact that you are trying to wrap yourself in an imaginary blanket of silk." While standing in the middle of a blizzard, the words did not bring Juro a sudden, magical burst of joy. He did not feel an instant release of his grief. Instead, he felt a small, deep shift in the way he stood on the dirt floor. He looked at the grey blanket, and for the first time, he stopped comparing it to the fabrics of the river town. He saw it for what it truly was, an unglamorous, heavy shield against death. He stepped forward, took one of the heavy, scratchy blankets from the pile, and wrapped it around his own freezing shoulders. It bit into his skin. It was heavy, and it smelled of the earth. But within moments, a dense, protective warmth began to bloom against his chest. Juro knelt down beside the old man's stool, not to ask for another lesson, but simply to help. He picked up a basket of the raw, dirty wool, and, with his own hands, he began to gently untangle the fibers, accepting the sharp prick of the buried briars without flinching. He stopped treating the rough material as an enemy or a mistake. He chose to sit precisely with the uncertainty of his cold life, breathing the greasy smell of the wool and recognizing that his peace would never be found by fleeing to a phantom past, but by learning to weave the heavy, imperfect thread that had actually been placed in his hands. The heavy, coarse, grey blanket that Juro wrapped around his shoulders is the very same texture of reality that is waiting for you at the edge of your bed tonight. When we look into the deep machinery of our latter-night anxiety, we discover a hidden habit that operates almost entirely in the dark. We use our regret as a tool for control. When the present moment feels uncertain, cold, or lonely, the analytical mind panics and retreats backward. It creates a beautiful, flawless mirror world out of our old, abandoned paths, using that imaginary perfection to criticize the raw, imperfect room we are actually lying in. We begin to use our shame as a strange form of medicine, believing that if we beat our hearts with enough self-judgment, we can somehow alter the geometry of our past or fix the perceived brokenness of our current situation. But this inner correction system is a profound illusion. The ancient insights of the Buddha reveal that we are constantly confusing the natural weather of life with our own internal resistance to it. There is a vital distinction to be made between the raw events that occur on our timeline and the immense, heavy structure of suffering we build on top of them afterward. The choice you made years ago, the path that led you to this specific evening, is simply the terrain you have arrived at. It is like a sudden, rocky slope that has appeared in the middle of a trail. That slope is not a mistake, and it is not a punishment. It is just the physical layout of the mountain. Our true exhaustion arrives when we refuse to walk on the rock that is actually beneath our boots. We stand on the stone slope, but in our heads, we are screaming at the mountain for not providing a flat, grassy meadow instead. We replay the old crossroad 1,000 times, trying to find a different outcome, trying to rewrite the script, trying to get approval from a younger version of ourselves that has long since turned to dust. We transform our pain into a permanent identity, wrapping ourselves in a tight shroud of regret until we can no longer feel the simple, saving warmth of our own pulse. We treat our entire life like a flawed, broken object that needs to be constantly repaired, rather than an organic vine that is simply moving through its necessary winter dormancy. True peace does not require you to dismantle the mountain or to erase the choices that brought you here. It does not ask you to find a magical, hidden path where you never feel a single pang of sorrow or doubt again. Freedom is far closer than that. It is a fundamental shift in how you relate to the grey, heavy fabric of your actual existence. It is the moment you stop trying to weave fine, imaginary silk out of the raw, coarse wool that has been placed in your hands. When you stop fighting the layout of the land, the rocky slope stops feeling like an enemy. It simply becomes the stable, unyielding foundation that holds your weight while you sleep. Consider how much quieter your mind becomes when you stop trying to fix your history. You are no longer required to be the architect of 100 different lifetimes. You can let the ledger drop from your tired fingers. The phantom futures that have been keeping you awake are not majestic truths. They are just old, unpruned branches that your mind keeps trying to water in the dark. By recognizing this pattern without any anger or self-blame, you are applying a deep, quiet compassion to your own nervous system. You are telling your heart that it is safe to stop running down those distant, non-existent corridors, and that it is finally time to come home to the dark clay of this present hour. As you lie here, feel the immense relief that comes with complete surrender to what is. You do not have to look successful to the night sky. You do not have to prove that your life has been a perfect line of unbroken achievements. You can be exactly like that old, knotty stump in the monastery vineyard, naked, dark, and utterly silent under the freezing stars. The winter wind can howl across the peaks as much as it wants, but it cannot harm a root that has fully accepted its place in the deep earth. Let your awareness sink out of the frantic watchtower of your forehead, moving down past the throat, down into the heavy, rhythmic expansion of your chest, where the only thing that matters is the slow, cool entry of this single, real breath. When the morning comes, you will step back into a world that operates on the relentless law of continuous cultivation. You will feel the familiar tug to check your glowing screen for some sudden sign of validation. Or you will find yourself sitting in morning traffic, comparing your ordinary speed with the curated, accelerated timelines of those around you. It is so easy to fall back into the habit of smiling through a heavy chest, pretending that your branches are full of summer leaves when you are actually freezing underneath. We have become masters at manufacturing a fake silk exterior for the world, hiding the rough, knotty reality of our fatigue, because we believe that taking a pause is a form of shameful failure. We treat our exhaustion like an illness that must be cured before we are allowed to have a single hour of unearned peace. But the practice of the winter vineyard is not something you leave behind in this bed. It can show up in the very middle of your modern afternoon. It can be that single, quiet breath you take right before you reply to an irritating message, or the moment you choose not to follow a frantic thought down a dark alleyway of self-doubt. When you feel the familiar panic of being left behind by your peers, you can notice that thought, name it as an old ghost branch, and gently return your focus to the solid surface beneath your shoes. You can care for your career, your family, and your relationships without trying to strangle them with your anxiety, shifting your grip from a tight, desperate clenching to a loose, open palm presence. You do not need to earn your dormancy. The earth does not ask the grapevines to justify their winter barrenness, and it does not demand a ledger of achievements before it agrees to feed their roots. The stillness of this night is your absolute right, an essential season that requires no permission from the world of productivity. When you choose to let the phantom futures rest in the soil, you are not quitting your life. You are simply dropping the dead wood so that your true core can survive the freeze. You are allowing yourself to be small, dark, and completely unproductive for a few sacred hours, trusting that this deep shedding is the only way to protect the vital sap that will eventually shape your coming spring. Let that permission wash over your limbs like a heavy, protective blanket of grey wool. There is no ledger to balance before you close your eyes, and there is no ideal version of yourself that you need to rescue from the past. You can let your phone remain dark on the nightstand, resisting the urge to seek a digital reassurance that can never truly warm your spirit. This quiet bedroom is your mountain terrace, a sanctuary where the winds of expectation cannot touch you. Allow the muscles of your jaw to unbind, let the space between your eyebrows flatten out, and feel the immense, silent weight of your body as it completely resigns from the duty of being anyone other than the person breathing in this dark room. The room has grown completely still now, and the quietness of the winter valley has settled directly over your eyes. The heavy, dark loam of the terrace is waiting. There are no more crossroads to evaluate. Tonight, there are no more phantom footsteps to trace. Through the corridors of your old memories, the entire landscape of your life has grown small, concentrated, and beautifully dark. Let your breath become a slow, soft murmur, a gentle vibration that belongs entirely to the dark soil beneath the frost line. With every quiet release of air, your limbs are growing increasingly heavy, sinking like ancient slate stones deep into the frozen clay of the mountainside. You have dropped the heavy bundle of dead wood from your hand. You have allowed the iron hook of reality to sever the branches that could no longer feed you. There is a profound, healing vacancy inside your chest now, a vast room where the cold night wind can pass without finding anything to snag against or tear. You are completely naked to the frost, a knotty stump that owes absolutely nothing to the world of growth or blossoming. The calculation has ended. The ledger is buried. The phantom merchant, the unleaved cities, and the lovers who were left behind are all resting quietly under 3 feet of damp clay, dissolving into pure, unbothered nourishment for the deep roots below. Let yourself sink down into that subterranean world, far below the ice, where the mountain wind cannot reach. The root tips are drinking the silent mineral darkness of the earth. They are not trying to figure out the shape of the next spring. They are not regretting the leaves they dropped 2 autumns ago. They are simply resting in the dense, warm safety of the deep ground, trusting the slow timeline of the seasons to take care of the rest. You have permission to join them in that absolute dormancy tonight. You have permission to stop solving your existence, to stop fixing your history, and to stop weaving an imaginary silk blanket for a body that is already warm under the heavy grey wool of what is. The night is vast, dark, and perfectly empty of choices. Your breath is just a quiet wave of frost rising and falling in the dark room. Let the mind let go of its last definition, dropping the names of your mistakes and the titles of your regrets, until you are nothing but a resting root, heavy, silent, and deeply secure within the unhurried winter of your true life. When the phantom paths have all been surrendered to the frozen ground, who is the one left, resting so deeply in the dark? It is the raw, quiet pulse of your own immediate life, stripped of its stories and freed from its heavy armor. The one who remains, after the ghosts have faded, is not a broken person trying to patch up an old mistake, but a vast and silent awareness that has finally agreed to stop running. Now, your heels feel remarkably heavy against the mattress, now, anchoring your legs like thick timber beams settling into the foundation of a sanctuary. There is no longer any momentum pushing you forward into tomorrow, and no lingering cord dragging you back into the years that have already closed their doors. The room around you feels incredibly safe, a dark cradle where the silence is no longer a vacuum of loneliness, but a dense, comforting presence that cradles your chest with every effortless rise and fall. Consider how magnificent it feels to simply resign from the position of your own judge. For decades, your mind has been running an elaborate courtroom in the dark, calling up witnesses from your youth, examining the crossroad where you made that difficult turn and passing sentences of shame upon the person you are today. But tonight, that courthouse has been abandoned. The benches are empty, the candles have been snuffed out, and the heavy iron keys have been tossed into the deep winter snow. You do not need to defend your choices to the darkness, and you do not need to explain why your life turned out to be rough grey wool instead of smooth valley silk. The mountain does not ask the stones for an explanation, and the frost does not demand an apology from the bare branches. Let your breath slow down even further until it becomes nothing more than a faint rhythmic rustle like the winter wind passing over a low stone wall. Each exhalation is a quiet letting go of a name, a title, a date, or a burden that you have carried across the seasons. You can feel a gentle, spreading warmth in the palms of your hands, a soft tingling that signals your physical energy is no longer being broadcast out into an imaginary past, but is drawing inward, pooling in the small of your back and the center of your belly. This is the gathering of your scattered soul, the quiet return of the water to the deepest wellhead after months of trying to irrigate an artificial desert. You are finally coming home to the only square inch of reality you have ever truly possessed. There is nothing you need to accomplish before the sun rises. The world outside your window will continue to spin. People will continue to measure their lives by their accumulations, and the frantic clock of modern life will keep demanding that you grow, expand, and produce. But inside this room, under the heavy shadow of this late hour, you are completely exempt from that contract. You are a root sleeping in the frozen loam, anonymous to the world, invisible to the productive sky, and completely safe from the scrutiny of others. Your actual life, with all its rough edges, its missed train rides, and its quiet, unglamorous rooms, is entirely sufficient for this night. It is thick enough to hold you. It is strong enough to shield you from the frost, and it is the only ground where your heart can truly find its rest. As the darkness grows thicker around your pillow, let the boundaries of your body become beautifully soft and blurred. It is difficult to tell where your skin ends and the cool air of the room begins. You are dissolving into the larger silence of the evening, becoming one with the dark soil, the slate terraces, and the ancient, resting grapevines that stand so patiently in the mountain mist. The weight of your head is completely surrendered to the pillow, every single muscle around your ears and your neck letting go of its tight, vigilant holding. There are no more equations to balance, no more phantom futures to feed, and no more lives to live, other than the slow, simple rhythm of the breath that is moving through you. Right now, sinking deeper, falling away from the words, drifting down into the warm, mineral dark quietude of the deep earth, where everything is finally permitted to sleep in the freezing dark, down into that profound stillness where the shadows lose their edges. The mind lets go of its last stubborn anchor. There is a deep biological relief in recognizing that you do not have to be the savior of your own history. For so many nights, your awareness has acted like a sleepless night watchman, patrolling the perimeter of old choices, checking the locks on doors that were shut a decade ago, and looking for flaws in the foundation engine of the life you have built. You have treated your current existence as a problem that must be solved, an equation that will finally balance out if you can just figure out exactly to think about what you lost. But the dark loam of the vineyard does not require your understanding to hold your weight. The earth does not demand that you solve the winter before it allows you to rest in its soil. Let the need to comprehend your timeline dissolve into the cool, quiet air of your bedroom. You can feel a heavy, spreading relaxation moving down through your shoulders, flowing into the large muscles of your back and sliding down into your hips like water, sinking into dry clay. Your physical form is becoming as dense and unyielding as the old stone terraces built by the monastics, perfectly adapted to hold the frost without cracking, to imperfectly balanced endure the long silent night. You are no longer trying to force a single thought to change its shape. If a memory of that unchosen path rises up, let it be exactly like a dry leaf that has been trapped beneath a sheet of river ice, frozen in place, harmless, static, and completely unable to bite your skin. The ancient path of the Buddha reminds us that true renunciation is not a punishing sacrifice, but a supreme act of self-preservation. It is the moment you look at the phantom life of fine silk and say, with complete honesty, that you no longer wish to freeze in its threads. You are choosing the heavy, grey wool of your actual, flawed, and beautiful presence. You are choosing the scratchy, honest texture of the room you are currently breathing in over the polished, sunlit mirage of a world that lives only in the back of your skull. There is an immense dignity in this choice. It is the moment the young monk stops, looking down at the river town, and turns his face fully toward the mountain cave, accepting the sharp prick of the buried briars, because he knows they are part of the real wood that keeps him warm. Listen to the absolute emptiness of the space between your breaths. That tiny, silent pause after you exhale is the most sacred room in your possession. In that space, you are neither the person who made a mistake nor the person who succeeded. You are not a daughter, a son, an employee, or a memory. You are simply the quiet, unnamed awareness that witnesses the cold air enter and the warm air leave. In that gap, the ledger of profit and loss does not exist. There are no unlived lives waiting for you in that silence, and there are no expectations to fulfill. Before you are allowed to pull the blanket up over your shoulders, it is a completely uncarved block of time, an acre of pure existence that asks nothing of you but your weight. Feel your pulse slowing down to match the slow, deep thud of the old weaver's wooden loom. The shuttle has stopped its flight for the night. The heavy threads of grey wool are tied off, resting in the shadows of the stone hut, while the blizzard patterns the window with white dust. The work of the day is completely finished, and the work of the future has not yet been born. You do not have to earn the right to close your eyes, and you do not need to prove that you have done enough with your years to merit a peaceful slumber. The rest you are entering is an ancient, universal current that carries all living things, from the root tips 3 feet beneath the frost line to the stars that glide invisibly behind the heavy winter clouds. Let the words you are hearing become more distant, shifting from distinct thoughts into a soft, textured murmur that blends with the ambient quiet of the evening. It is like the sound of mountain mist pooling on the slate steps outside, a soft, heavy blanket of moisture that deadens every sharp noise and rounds every jagged edge. Your ankles are relaxing now, your toes are loose and heavy, and the skin across your temples has loosened completely, shedding the dry tension of a day spent calculating the future. You are a root that has found its true depth in the soil, entirely undisturbed by the memories that used to make your heart race in the dark hours. The ghosts of your alternative timelines have no power over this mattress. They cannot touch the real warmth that is gathering in your chest, and they cannot alter the absolute safety of this dark sanctuary. You have given them back to the clay, tucking them into the earth, where they can slowly decompose into the quiet mineral darkness of the past. Let yourself drift further down into that soft, heavy loam, letting go of the need to be okay, letting go of the need to be healed, and simply allowing your consciousness to become as dense and still as a stone terrace buried under winter snow. Sinking down, untying the last hemp strap of the mind's saddle, falling away into the deep, unbothered sleep of a vine that has finally stopped searching for its lost leaves. Down through the deeper veins of that heavy mountain stone, your awareness travels away from the front of the mind entirely. There is a sacred space at the very back of the head, a dark room where the light of old regrets cannot penetrate. We spend our lives believing that to have peace, we must first make sense of every choice, resolve every conflict, and receive a quiet apology from the past. But Zen wisdom suggests that true liberation arrives only when we are willing to leave the story unfinished. It is the moment you allow the book to remain open on a random page, letting the dust settle over the characters and the plot lines, while you step out of the library and into the silent winter courtyard. You do not need to read the ending of the life you didn't live. You do not need to know how it turns out. Let that desperate curiosity drop away from your eyelids like heavy coins. The muscles around your eyes are releasing their grip, the soft tissue behind the brow flattening out until your face feels as broad and smooth as a slate slab in the deep woods. You might notice how your breath has become an effortless guest in your body, arriving without a formal invitation, staying for a moment to warm itself in your chest and departing without a trace of hesitation. This is the natural rhythm of non-attachment, a biological proof that your spirit already knows how to let go of what it no longer requires. The body does not hold on to the old breath out of fondness for the oxygen of 5 minutes ago. It releases it into the dark air, trusting the emptiness that remains. You are entering the great winter of your awareness, the season where the ledger is dropped and the uncarved block remains uncarved. In the ancient texts, the Buddha spoke of a state of mind that is like a vast canvas that cannot be painted upon by the strokes of praise or blame. When you are lying in this bed, you are that canvas. The world might have called your choices right or wrong. You might have called yourself a success or a failure during the bright hours of the day. But under the heavy blanket of this hour, those descriptions are completely meaningless. They are like labels tied to a tree that has already shed its leaves. The labels flutter in the wind, but the bark does not care about the words written upon them. Feel the dense, grounded quality of your torso as it settles against the mattress. It is as if your ribs have become part of the ancient stone terraces themselves, holding back the weight of the dark soil, remaining completely unmoved by the frantic thoughts that pass through the higher peaks. There is a deep, warm security in becoming a fixture of the earth. A terrace does not worry about whether it should have been built on a different slope. It does not look across the valley at the sunnier ridges with a feeling of envy. It simply holds its acre of ground, absorbing the frost, drinking the mist, and providing a stable foundation for the sleeping vines that rest in its care. You are holding your own ground tonight, and it is entirely enough. Let the image of the weaver's old wooden loom return to your mind one final time, but see it now as completely dark and empty. The old man has long since laid down to sleep on his simple straw mat, wrapped in the very same rough, grey blanket that he spent his day creating. The heavy wooden shuttle rests on the frame. The raw wool sits quietly in its basket, and the entire hut is filled with the deep, slow rhythm of his breathing. The weaver does not worry if the blanket he made today was too rough or if the pattern was too simple. He knows that when the black frost arrives at midnight, the weight of that wool will be the only thing that matters. He does not wish for silk, because he understands that the value of a thing is found in its capacity to protect the life that is actually here. You can wrap yourself in that very same understanding. Now, your life does not need to be a masterpiece of fine silk to be worthy of your love. It does not need to be a flawless sequence of perfect choices and glittering achievements. The rough, knotty wool of your actual history, with all its patches and its uneven threads, is the only garment that has been woven specifically for your shape. It is the only thing that can keep your heart from freezing when the world turns cold. By accepting its weight, you are letting go of the tragic fantasy of what might have been, and you are stepping into the supreme sanctuary of what is. Let your consciousness drift further down into the subterranean quiet, moving away from the sound of these words until they are nothing but the distant hum of a mountain stream flowing deep beneath a layer of blue ice. The water is still moving down there in the pitch-black tunnels of the rock, but it moves with an absolute lack of hurry, untroubled by the freezing gales that are currently reshaping the snowdrifts on the summit. You are that hidden current, moving safely beneath the surface, protected by 3 feet of frozen clay, entirely free from the obligation to be seen or evaluated by the sun. Your body is heavy, your breath is a quiet shadow, and your spirit has finally returned to the single acre of land it belongs to. The phantom futures have all lost their color, their branches dropping into the soil, to become nothing but silent, dark memory. You do not have to solve a single problem before you close your eyes, and you do not have to figure out how to navigate the trail tomorrow. The mountain is holding you, the winter soil is protecting you, and the darkness is inviting you to completely dissolve into the great, unbothered dormancy of the deep ground, falling away from the ledger, falling away from the choices, drifting down into the soft, warm loam where the roots are already fast asleep in the freezing dark. Somewhere, far above this valley, past the reach of your closed eyes, the same frost that has silenced the vineyard is also holding a quiet promise inside its grip. The old vine-keeper never once mourned the bareness of his terraces because he understood a law that the vine itself has always known without needing to be taught. Nothing this deeply asleep is ever truly gone. The stump does not keep count of the days until spring, and it does not strain to hurry the thaw. It simply rests, and in resting, it allows the whole slow machinery of the mountain to do what fear could never manage on its own, then to shift and to eventually turn green again in its own unhurried time. You do not have to believe in tomorrow's warmth to be allowed this stillness tonight. The weaver's grey wool does not ask you to have faith in the coming thaw before it agrees to keep you warm through the coldest hour of the night. It simply does its quiet work, here, now, wrapped around the only shoulders you actually have. Whatever waits on the other side of this sleep, whatever ordinary morning is gathering, somewhere beyond the shuttered window, it will arrive on its own schedule, without needing your permission or your vigilance to usher it in. Feel, one last time, the full weight of your body, resting into the shape the mattress has already made for you. There is nothing left to prune tonight, The old man has set down his iron hook. The shuttle has gone still on its wooden frame, and the last of the lush wool has been gathered back to its basket for the night. Somewhere down in the dark, the roots you left buried an hour ago are no longer separate from the ground that holds them. They have become the mountain's own quiet breathing, indistinguishable from the stone, the frost, and the long, unhurried patience of the winter itself. Notice how little is actually required of you in this final moment. You do not have to keep the vineyard. You do not have to tend the loom, and you do not have to carry the weight of a single unfinished season into your dreams. The mountain has already agreed to hold everything you are too tired to hold yourself, the old grief, the unchosen roads, the quiet ache of comparison, all of it resting now beneath a blanket of frost that asks for nothing in return. Your only remaining task is to let your shoulders soften one final degree, to let your jaw rest without its old vigilance, and to let the last thought of the day dissolve as easily as breath, meeting cold air. Let this be the only task left for your mind tonight. Nothing at all. Not a single ledger. Not one more unopened door. Not a single mile of the trail you did not take. Just the warm, heavy dark, and the slow, steady rise and fall of a chest that has finally agreed to stop keeping score of the years, and if the life you are actually living tonight, rough woven and imperfect as it is, was never the lesser path at all, only the one warm enough to have truly kept you alive through every winter you were ever asked to survive.